those who were waiting for me to start right on time, I apologize for the late start. Just took a while to get things set up this morning. And we are going to be doing some figure drawing. Or, to put it more precisely, we're going to be fixing some bad figure drawings. And let me know if the sound is really bad, because the mic, due to the way I have to set this up, the mic is farther away from me than it usually is when I'm drawing. In fact, as I scoot a cat condo around in my studio just to make space to move the drawing board closer to the microphone. So these are some figure drawings from this week's figure workshop. And I'm just going to start with one of the ones here that did not come out as well as I'd like it. There's no real sense of depth and volume in the way that the legs actually move away from the torso. And also the torso had some change in terms of volume planes that weren't quite working for me. So I'm going to come over here and I am going to redraw this with an eye on analyzing and adjusting and correcting. So let's just get at it. And if there are comments in the chat that I miss, you guys will have to be patient and forgiving, because when I'm looking at a drawing board, I'm at an angle where the comments aren't right in front of me. So I'm going to get in here, get out my erasers. All right. Just trying to get this set up to give me some nice tones here. And it's a very strange thing, just trying to take a previously done drawing and see how, by focusing on correcting things in hindsight, I can see so many more of the flaws I didn't see while I was furiously struggling to get down on page when I was in front of the model. In fact, that's something I'm going to make a note to myself here. Hindsight. That is probably the most important thing when it comes to this whole exercise of redrawing bad drawings. I see Hosseinian is in the chat. Hosseinian is in the chat. I apologize. I always butcher your name, but good to see you, as always. Yeah. In the same way that, you know, hindsight is 20/20, there is a difference when you're looking at drawings that you've made in the past. You know, we normally, you know, when we do look at something later, we're like, oh, all I see are all the mistakes I made, all the things I wish I did differently. That hindsight is probably the most valuable thing you can use to learn. Because yes, I'm seeing mistakes that I did not see when I was in front of the model. And I can just say, all right, well, what would happen if I had just corrected those while I was drawing? And then that takes it to the next level, which is if I do this enough, this practice of looking at drawings that I did in the past and fixing those things that I didn't see while I was in front of the model, the hope, the goal is that each time I do it, I get a little bit better at seeing them sooner, such that I will begin to correct these mistakes while I'm in front of the model. And correcting the mistakes while I'm in front of the model is the definition of getting better. Let's see if I can move the camera over a little bit closer. The ongoing battle that I have is figuring out how to get the camera into a position where it gives you guys as viewers a good view while at the same time not blocking my view. You know what? Probably better to not get too close. I wanted to get it nice and close and give you guys like a super like ASMR type, like you're right on the surface next to my hand. But I realize as I do this, one, you're already getting it at a weird oblique angle. You're getting it kind of off to the side. But also, you're not going to see the legs. They're going to get cut off by the camera as I draw, and I don't want that. So I already have buyer's remorse. I immediately want to put it back to where I just had it a minute ago. So I'm trying to break the leg down into simple two-dimensional shapes that I then convert into three-dimensional shapes. Although I realize I am really destroying the sense of volume here. Well, the sense of proportion. I've got to get this leg coming up a little bit more. No, that should come down more. Then sort of figure out about where the other foot is resting. It's resting on the rail, one of the stools railings. Let's see here. Paul is in the chat. Says looking good. Thank you, Paul. You know, it's weird. When I'm drawing the superhero sketch cards, the drawing at an angle does not bother me. But for some reason, when I'm doing figurative work, it drives me nuts that this is at such a distorted angle and you guys aren't getting to see it the way that I see it. Now, I mean, if I'm going to be honest with you guys, what I've drawn here, I already want to start over because I feel like the problem I have is the actual figure is in the drawing that I was really drawing from. The model was hunched over forward more and their torso was shorter. So it's not even that they had particularly long legs. Their torso is just shorter than I've drawn it here. And I look at this and I feel like the proportions are off, and I want to draw another one right next to it and just sort of like, sometimes I will do that where I will have, let me tweak the camera just a tiny bit. Where I will have two simultaneous bad drawings going on at one time. And the idea is I'm trying to correct for different problems. So one, I might be trying to correct for volume, while the other one I'm trying to correct for proportion. The other one I'm trying to correct for gesture. So in trying to correct the gesture, what I want is to make this, well, gesture and proportion. I want to make this a little bit shorter and then have this foreshortened more, turning off into space. So before I even get into the rest of the other details of the figure, I'm thinking about this just in terms of drawing cubes and trying to get the front, side, and top or bottom correct in space. So yeah, there's a whole rib cage inside of here that's not this blocky shape, and same with the pelvis. But I'm starting off trying to just get these things to feel like really sort of like with Michelangelo carving stone. I'm trying to really think of it as a big block that I'm carving into. And without even having the arms on there, I feel like just getting the head, getting the torso, the head, and the legs in the right proportion, I feel like that is a much better improvement over this. So it's like a transition from the drawing that was over here that's off screen now to this one to this one. So, and this isn't me exaggerating or cartooning the gesture. This is me just trying to make what was happening read more clearly. They really were leaning forward more, and the left side was dipping down. So now I think the challenge here is when I put the arm over the front, because the arm would block a lot of this transition from back to side. And the transition from back to side is a great place to really help define that three-dimensional form, because you can show how kind of that roll of fat around the belly, how it can be in the back and then change direction going around the front. But I'm going to be blocking that with all the arm, with the arm coming down. So I kind of have to figure out how to try and convey as much of that as possible while it's all going behind a column, as it were, being the hand, almost like a column hiding all of these things. I'm going to put a very light plane in here to indicate the stool that he's sitting on. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I will go through and I'll have the same drawing and I'll redraw it 3, 4, 5 times. And each time it's just exploring different aspects, trying to figure out what are the things that I'm not getting, that I'm not properly conveying. And I will tell you that I made this stool a little bit too tall. because this foot should be coming down in front of it. And I'm trying to look at about where the wrist should be. And getting the arm in proportion, I find it can be a little bit easier if I look at where the hand actually ends in comparison to, say, the torso or the thigh, how far down it goes. In that case, I put it down a little too far. But if I get the hand in about the right place, then what I can do is reverse engineer and go, all right, well, if the hand or arm is overall that long, I know that the forearm is shorter than the upper arm. I can reverse engineer the proportion. And again, this is a lot straighter than an actual forearm should be. But then what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll kind of like contour the anatomy. Kind of wrap those muscles around. Now, this would be one of those where I really wish I actually could go back in time and look and see what the thigh was doing in comparison to, well, basically where the thigh meets the stool. Because it feels like, if anything, the stool should be cutting off part of the thigh here. Because the thigh is moving away from us in space. And the lower leg is moving towards us in space. Jim's trying to solicit some more some more John Henry Unicorn fan art. He says, "You finished John Henry Unicorn. Now it's time to do Prince Pomona. Go!" Well, I am definitely, I'm open to doing more, but I will tell you right now, well, I have two focuses. This was something that I'm doing because I needed to, I try to go over the drawings from class before the next week's class. So I have figure drawing classes on Wednesday, and I try to do these. Sometimes what's really nice is if I can do it the very next day, like do them Thursday while the model is still fresh in my mind. But I knew I wanted to spend a little bit of time going over my work from class, because next week is going to be a busy week for me work-wise. But I also really, 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 really need to get back to carving out some time for writing and lock down that next comic book, at least the first issue of it. So I've been working on this mug for like ages now. And it is challenging when you have a project that you have to set aside for legitimate, scheduling reasons, just work and life and stuff going on. But at the same time, when it's something that's been gestating for such a long period, you lose a lot of steam the longer you take to get something out into space. And two, you start wondering, like, am I ever really gonna do this? It starts feeling less like reality and more like you're doing fanfic of your own life. And I suppose we all are feeling that to a certain degree when we have like so many things we want to do, and we're not able to just crank out a feature film like Jim. And Jim is definitely is earnestly, like he said, seriously, you did an amazing job. Thank you, my friend. It was fantastic. I am humbled and honored, and it was fun to do, and I was glad to do it, man. Let's see here. So yeah, this definitely feels like it has more volume than that original sketch that I did in class. And, you know, for some reason, algebra just popped into my head because, you know, last thing artists want to do is do math. But I was thinking about how, you know, when you first start learning algebra, you're always solving for x. You know, x is some unknown thing. And I was thinking about that in terms of like doing this drawing and fixing the volume, the direction that the legs are moving in. Instead of solving for x, I'm solving for volume. Sometimes I'm solving for anatomy. Sometimes I'm solving for gesture. Sometimes I'm solving for proportion. Like if I think of all of these things that are the things I do wrong in a drawing, if I think of those as variables, I'm always solving for those different variables. Now, I will tell you, the front leg, I mean, the upper leg feels like it's more in proportion and has better volumes. The lower leg actually does not, because the lower leg, I actually have it doing this concave thing when really it was doing more of a convex bending back. So let's see what happens if I just erase all of this in here. Whoop. Oh wow. The easel I'm using almost took a header. Because I don't have my drawing board on the easel, I actually have it on my lap, and I'm just using the easel to lean the drawing against it. Because that's just more comfortable for me. I don't mean to be ruining Paul's morning. He's like, yeah, been running around the house listening, not able to comment. Is giving me FOMO. Ooh. Said my wife blowed her ankle last night trying to help her. Well, man, obviously that is the most important thing. You know, gotta keep wifey's legs elevated and iced and healthy. I hope it's not too bad. I hope it's not something that requires a trip to the doctor or anything even more serious than that. And I hope she makes a speedy recovery. He said a what's up to Jim there. Yeah, you see, and another thing, having too much to do is keeping me from doing other things I've been wanting to do. Like I had mentioned, wanting to have a voice channel open, a Discord voice channel during these live streams, so that people could just talk instead of type. Because that would actually make things a lot easier on me too as well. Because I can just sit here and draw, listen to you guys, comment and reply. By the way, does the volume drop off if I turn my head like this and I turn away from the mic? Because I have been trying to find a good position for the microphone while I'm doing figure drawing. And if you guys tell me that it doesn't make any difference whether I'm like facing directly at the mic like this or if I'm looking at the drawing board and talking, if it doesn't make any difference at all, then I'm not going to worry about it. But if it does make a difference, because I have the gain set really low on my microphone, if it does make a difference, then I need to continue trying to find a more optimal position. But if it doesn't make a difference, then I'm going to stop worrying about it and just focus on making art. All right. Now, this is better. This feels more like what the model was doing. However, the leg's a little thicker now than it should be. I got to carve into it a little bit. Because the model has very strong legs, but they aren't like thick legs. And he's an older gentleman. And he has kind of like a Barney Rubble-ish build, like very, very strong core, but like slender but strong arms and slender but strong legs. And I'm just sort of rounding out the buttocks to kind of give that sense of them, just rounding them a little bit more. It's like that whole idea of squash and stretch in animation, rounding them out a little bit more as they press against the surface just helps sell the idea that there's weight coming down onto the stool. You know, and that's not me exaggerating something. That's me. Like I remember that from the class. I mean, that's just what the human body does. And to be honest, I didn't capture it as well in the actual drawing in comparison to capturing it now. Let's see here. So Paul says, Jeremy, I haven't drawn much in the past few months. Had a heavy drawing day yesterday, man, feeling rusty. But he also said on the mic that it sounds good either way. Thank you. Good. Happy to hear that. You know, one of the things that I just in reading stuff online, they say that when people are doing YouTube or any type of like online stuff, the sound quality probably matters more than the visual quality. You can even have kind of crappy visuals, but if that sound is off, people just are like, it's like listening to nails on a chalkboard. They can't do it. So I'm always concerned about trying to keep the sound quality good. Well, you know, I mean, I definitely went through a period earlier in the year where I was not able to do any real drawing for like weeks at a time. But you know, the nice thing is that the longer we do this, the less we're freaked out by that whole, it feels like I completely forgotten how to draw. Like we all get that, and we'll all go through periods where it's like our hand is like, what? You've never held a pencil before. And it's more irritating when we're doing it, when we get that feeling and we have been drawing regularly. But I know that if I stop drawing for even a week or a couple of days, that's going to happen. But the older we get and the more we've gone through that experience, the more we're like, okay, I know it's going to come back. Don't freak out. My drawings may be wonky for a week or two or a couple of weeks. I will tell you, I had one time where I was doing a life drawing class, and all of a sudden, and this was something where I was not taking a break. I was just drawing every week. And I went through a period where for like for literally out of a 12-week class, 6 weeks of it was just me just dogging every pose, and everything was wonky. And even when I came back and did analysis, did sketches like these to try and look at it and figure it out, like none of that was working. And I was just like, oh my God, is it possible that the ability to draw is just leaving me? But, you know, I've been doing this long enough that I should not freak out about that thing. Drawing is one of the few skills that, you know, with the exception of some motor skill decline, generally speaking, we get better as we get older. And even with motor skill decline, you look at somebody like, I think, was it David Hockney who was doing drawings like using a computer because he just could not, like it was either his eyesight that was going or his hand that was going. But there was somebody who was doing like really large scale portraits where the machine was like, he was still painting them, but he was like almost painting them pixel by pixel, and the machine was plotting them out on like huge plots and then printing them to canvas. But the drawings were still his. So just goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way. But too much shadow in here. Or rather, it doesn't feel like a shadow. It feels more like I'm trying to do weird anatomical things instead of just being like a line of tone that's running down the inside of this arm. Let's see here. Oh yeah, Herman's in the chat. What up, Herman? He says, I understand. I have issues with forgetting how to draw, and it may take me a day to get it back, so I understand. And let's see here. Paul says, Jeremy, do you do any music? I have 0 music skills. I would say that I have 0.1% music skills. If you're at 0, I used to dabble in guitar, but it was more sort of like I took like maybe one 12-week class, and then I started learning how to. I never learned how to read music, but I would tablature is just that way of writing guitar music so that people who don't read sheet music can still understand where to put their fingers on the strings. And so I would learn songs by just picking up just searching for the tablature for a particular song and practicing it until I could play it. But I mean, I never was good enough to actually perform anything like that. Like I would never call myself an actual musician at any point in my life. When I was in grade school, in primary school, I played saxophone. And it's funny, I never made it past like 2 years of elementary school band. And the whole reason why I stopped is because my brothers told me that my brothers went to the same middle school that I did. And they told me that the band teacher was a real jerk. And I was like, well, I don't want to take a class with a guy who's a jerk. So I just had already decided I wasn't going to do band when I got to junior high. But the reason why I picked saxophone is because originally I wanted to be a drummer. And don't ask me how you have a band without drums. But when I was in elementary school, they said, well, sorry, we're not going to have drums in this band. It was all like woodwind and brass. And there was no drum. I mean, they eventually did bring in drums like the following year, but I don't know why they wouldn't let me do it the year I wanted to. But I wanted to play drums because drums are cool. And they said no. And I said, all right, well, what's the next coolest instrument to drums? And I said saxophone. So that's how I ended up playing saxophone. I mean, trombone is pretty cool too. but yeah. So I have played musical instruments, but I at no point in my life would ever say that I was actually a musician. Let's see here. Try to erase out some of this. It's a little bit too dark. And this whole lower leg should be lighter because it's facing the light more than, the underside of the thigh is turned away from the light, whereas most of this leg is turned towards it. Yeah, I feel like this is a significant improvement from the original drawing that I did. I'm almost done with this, and then I will show you. I'll pull the camera back to kind of compare between the two. I was curious, what made you ask about music, Paul? Because honestly, I know a lot of creators who are very talented artists, and then also on top of being visual artists are also musicians. And I'm like, damn it, I'm envious. I'm envious of people who have like multiple creative abilities, because I feel like I just do the one thing and I don't even do it as well as I'd like to. And you got these showboats over here making music, writing poetry, making paintings and films, and my ass is stuck just sketching with charcoal. All right. Well, I will tell you the proportion is a little wonky with the chair. And I don't really need to do his hair. I'll just get the head in there and the hair. So let's see. I need some tissues before I go and touch my computer. My fingers are dirty as hell. But yeah, just to show you a comparison between the drawing that I just did versus the drawing that I'm redrawing. Pull this back a little bit. But yeah, so you can kind of see, that's what I was working from. And even though you're seeing it kind of at a distorted angle, but the other one has a little bit more volume structure to it. See, I feel like I need to have multiple camera angles so I can show you sort of an over the shoulder on my shoulder shot so you can see exactly what I'm seeing. The problem is that anytime, if the camera is at all on this side of me, I'm constantly hitting it with my arm. So I still have yet to find a solution for this that really makes me happy. I mean, I actually kind of did. There was a point where I had the camera actually like clipped to the bottom of the drawing board. So it was kind of like between my legs, giving you guys an angle, like kind of coming up right in front of me and then looking at that. But I don't know. I'm never quite happy with where I end up placing the camera while I'm doing these. Let's see here. Let me scroll back up. Oh, Herman says, I need to get that eraser pen. I keep forgetting. I need to go on Blick. Now, these, I mean, you can get them at the grocery store. They sell them in like the stationery aisle at like any store. This is just, it's a Pentel Click pen. I don't know if you can see that written on there. It's kind of, faded and disappearing, but I think that I think it just rubbed off over time. But anyway, these are just Pentel Click pens. They have them at they should have them at most grocery stores. They'll definitely have it at any stationery store, any Staples or Office Max or whatever. So, I mean, hell, you can go to a FedEx, and if it's one of the FedEx that has like the Kinko's FedEx where it has stationery supplies, they'll have these there too. So they're not hard to come by. Not like I don't want you to go to Blick, but for me, Blick was like every time I'd go there, that's like a pricey trip because I go in there and start looking around saying, oh, I want this, I want that. I haven't used this device before. It gets in your system. Let's see here. Paul says, a few years ago, Jim tried to teach me to strum the guitar. It was not going to happen. Well, strumming the guitar is one thing. Playing it is another. Let's see here. You know what? I'm going to be super vulnerable and do something that came out really, really bad. A very, very bad drawing. Basically, here, I'll show you what's on the screen in front of me. So this portrait, I try to do a portrait, at least one pose per week in figure drawing class just to keep practicing doing portraits. And the portrait came out fine. The model had his hand next to his head. And that hand came out so horrible that's the reason why it's like all kind of half erased out, is I felt like it ruined a very, very good portrait. So I'm going to try and work on that hand, knowing full well that my hands are wonky right now. So that's me just saying, all right, yeah, I'm drawing some wonky ass hands. Let's work on some hands. I mean, what I should really do is break out my George Bridgman book and do some studies from Bridgman. But that'll be for another session. Maybe we'll do that next week. I don't know. Let's see here. On the guitar thing, Paul said it's not going to happen. Jim says never say never, Paul. Herman says, oh, I was in the ER the other day, still having issues, having chest and stomach chest pains and stomach, so they determined it could be acid reflux. I tell you, this getting old stuff sucks, man. I am sorry to hear you are going through it. I have been getting more upset stomachs as I get older, but yeah, there's definitely been some medical stuff that has been cropping up with me with age, and not a fan. Not a fan, man. This year, Paul says I did play trombone in middle school band. That's all gone from my brain and body, though. And yes, Jim also sends some love your way. Herman says, take care of that. I hope you feel better. So Jim says it's good to get an earring in a sports car when you get old. You got to get both. I'm gonna leave some of those comments on the side. Jim says butt implants help. Let's see here. Herman says, I messed around with Fruity Loops before when I was in college trying to make beats. I may buy it once again once I upgrade my computer first. But as far as playing and reading music, no. My mother's side of the family. Let's see here. Paul says, from a distance, I like the heavy marks on the figure. Let's see here. Herman says, I was the odd black science and art dude of the family. And oddball science and art dude of the family. Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely am right there with you as well. Both an oddball and being an arty science. Well, I don't know how sciencey I was. I mean, I brought up algebra, so I guess to some degree. I mean, Limbo's way, I'm a nerd. Ain't that I'm you look up blurred in the dictionary, you're gonna see my ass. Paul says, I'm jealous of musicians. Art and science makes sense to me. And Jim says, I'm jealous of magicians. Well, you just put on your robe, your goatskin robe and horns, and do a little bloodletting, and there you go. Got yourself some magic. Herman says, I miss using charcoal. I have it, but I have software that's good at emulating those real art tools enough that it won't look digital. I can't stand the digital look unless it needs to look that way. But what's funny is, I mean, I honestly feel like digital is... I hide that. I feel like digital is a look unto itself in the same way that inking with a brush versus inking with a crow quill looks. Like, I'm usually not trying to think about how to make stuff not look digital. I let let me put it this way. What I'm trying to say is that my artwork looks like my artwork, regardless of whether it's traditional or digital. So I let the fact that I'm using a particular medium inform that particular thing that I'm working, whatever medium I'm working with. So if I'm working digital, then fine. It just looks like however a digital drawing looks like. If it works, if I'm working traditional, if I'm inking with a brush, if I'm inking with a pen, however those things are, I just let them be what they're going to be. And I guess that when I say that I don't think I necessarily have found my style yet, that's disingenuous, because if my work looks the same, if you can identify my work regardless of the tool I'm using, then that to me is the definition of style. So to some degree, I do have a style. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't worry too much about how digital quote unquote looks, or trying to avoid the digital look or the digital style. I don't know if that makes you feel any better about Herman or changes your feelings. So I figured you know what you're going for, and that's the most important thing, is whether the tool can give you what you're looking for. But when I'm drawing digitally, even when I use, there's a digital brush pack that I bought that specifically does a very good job of emulating traditional charcoal. It's an artist named Lane Brown. and he made a digital brush pack. I love that brush pack, and I love the fact of how it looks, but I still never feel like I'm trying to hide the fact that it's digital. You know, see here, I keep hitting this thing with. This is what I'm talking about. The more I move the camera around, the closer I keep whacking it with my arm. I'm trying to find a place where you guys can see, and I'm not smacking into this thing at the same time. Actually, here, I should probably move this up. Oh, that's what I should do. Is I should loosen this. I'm sitting here sort of screwing and unscrewing. I did get a gooseneck clamp, but I found that I don't know. I kind of like this thing, even though it requires me having to screw and unscrew to put it in positions. So I don't know. Maybe I'll do it. I haven't done a session with the gooseneck clamp lately, so maybe I'll try that. Jim says, "Great drawing, GB." Thank you, sir. Question for the maestro. Please don't call me maestro. And all. What comic artist did you try to emulate the most as a youngster, successfully or unsuccessfully? Wow. All right. Artists I try to emulate. Let's see here. I'm gonna read your guys' answers first, and then I'll get to mine. Let's hear. Herman says to Paul, I'm the type of stare into space, stare at a blank paper. Weird like that, I suppose. No, I mean, I guess some people, it's like you can see shapes in a blank space, almost like staring up at clouds. I don't think there's anything crazy about it at all. And eventually, I guess inspiration can kind of bubble up out of the surface. Oh, Herman says, in terms of the erasers, there's an electric one that looks about that size. Yeah, I have. I don't want to get up from where I'm seated right now, but I do have a Sakura electric sharpener that is basically like if you took this thing, but then gave it like a small, like, I don't know, like not a switchblade, like a small flashlight handle. Then with this thing sticking out of it, it's kind of like that. Love that thing. That thing is like my ride or die go-to. It's only a few feet away, but it would involve untangling myself from the current drawing setup to get to. Let's see here. Paul says, Jim, I honestly don't think I have an artist I've tried to emulate. And he says, Herman, by the way, I'm eating a bowl of all brand cereal. I feel about to get an old thing. This is the aging artist stream. That's where we're at. We're all rolling over the hill. Oh, I could see that. Jim says Sergio Aragones and John Byrne. Those were mine. And James is here. He says, looks like you got a late start, but I had an errand to run, so it worked out. Yeah, I got a late start, but I'm glad you're here, man. Dylan's here. Hi, Dylan, in the chat. And Paul says, but when I was trying to emulate no artist, I was unsuccessful. I'm interested what you mean by that, by trying to emulate no artist. So you're saying that it still came out looking like some other artists? Okay, so who are the artists that I tried to emulate? Well, Jim had mentioned John Byrne. I absolutely tried to emulate John Byrne when I was a kid. I would copy pages from his West Coast Avengers run. I would copy some of his X-Men drawn X-Men pages. John Byrne was a big one. Walt Simonson, loved me some Simonson Star Slammers. And believe it or not, I would say there was some Rob Liefeld, not his Cable and New Mutant stuff, but he had a thing in darker image where he was doing his version of Lobo. And it was this character called, I think it was called Bloodwolf or something like that. And I just loved the layouts. Like the storytelling was incredibly dynamic, and it was this weird, funny, wacky, you know, parody. That's the word I was looking for. The other thing that happens is you look for words and your brain freezes. You get older. It was a fun, wacky kind of parody of Lobo. And I also really loved the early Lobo stuff too. Keith Geffen, Simon Beasley. That's another one. I definitely tried to copy Beasley, and Sienkiewicz is one who I did a whole entire issue of a comic crime horror story, sort of in his trying to do basically an impression of Bill Sienkiewicz. I'm trying to think, who else? Who did I? Now, well, I wouldn't say that I copied any of those people successfully. I would say the only artist that I ever, I think, successfully copied was when I really started trying to get into just draftsmanship and just trying to forget about style and just understand the figure. Some of my drawings have a Bridgman-esque and an Andrew Loomis-esque look to them, but I think that that's more a factor of what I was trying to do, which is to strip away style and say, what happens if I am just focusing on structure and volume and anatomy? So I'm trying to think of who else I might have copied. I mean, I would say to some degree, all of the image founders made an impression on me. Probably Mark Silvestri was the one that I probably tried to imitate the most. I really liked Rob Liefeld's storytelling, and I know that he gets, a lot of flack for just doing everything that's all big splash pages, but there was some stuff around like the beginning, around that darker image thing, where just like the storytelling felt actually really dynamic to me. I really enjoyed that. I would say nowadays, if anything, I'm trying to imitate Alex Toth, and failing miserably. But yeah, this hand just really doesn't feel like it's doing much for me. James says Bisley's stuff is great. Yes, absolutely, completely agree. Let's see here. Paul Herman says to Paul, the doctor's gonna have me eating sand and leaves by the time they're done with this. So can't eat this, can't eat that. You made some weight loss. That's good. This is I'm here eating and nibbling like a slug. One of the things I started doing is I try to have 5 days a week. I try to have a little. I have a smoothie, and it's fresh berries, spinach, ginger, and cinnamon. That's it. That's all that's in it. It's supposed to be really good for the heart. The ginger and the cinnamon both help with anti-inflammation. It's supposed to help with bringing cholesterol down. I will tell you that this thing that I just drew here, when I do a drawing and I can tell that structurally it's not working, the next step for me is to go underneath, to go into the bones. So The next step is to look at the wrist, the end of the ulna. The end of the radius. And I forget the name of this bundle of small bones that's right, that really makes up the mass of the wrist. But there's like a big bundle of small bones that are all right together before you start getting into the ones that spread out to the knuckles. But yeah, I find that when I can't get structure down, and I try to go below the surface. And honestly, I think I really do need to, and maybe I'll do it. I don't know if I'll do it next stream, but I need to go in and do a deep dive and kind of reacquaint myself with the anatomy, the bones of the hand, the muscles of the hand. Let's see here. Let's see here. Paul mentioned back to artists. Like I like the really loose, blocky art, like Mahfood, Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, Jim Mahfood for those who don't know. But yeah, I definitely, all of those I would say are influences on me. I'd say probably my favorite Frank Miller, because his work, definitely changed and evolved over time. My favorite Frank Miller is probably his Electra Lives Again, I've mentioned before. And for terms of like graphic novels, it's probably one of my favorites. See here. Dylan says, I really like that head you drew. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dylan. That's the reason why I'm drawing this hand, is because I drew the head and the hand was next to it. And it's one of those things where I did this really nice study of a head during a figure drawing class. It was a 20-minute pose. And then I thought, oh, this will be a great chance to practice heads and hands together. And I drew that hand the hand was next to their head. They're holding like a staff and they're kind of leaning on it. And that hand, I tried to like throw that in like the last 3 minutes of the pose, and it just was awful. And that was when like my brain, that's what my brain does. It says, oh, if you're drawing something that's coming out awful, you obviously need to practice that. And that's what led me to come over and say, all right, let me spend some time working on some hands. Paul says, I like Mike Turner and J. Scott Campbell. Real polished look. Never emulated those for sure. Yeah, I would say the same. I definitely admire those guys, but they aren't necessarily a style that I know for myself, like I'm not a cartoony art. Like you guys mentioned Jim Mahfood, and I like the Ink Pulp podcast that Mahfood does with Sean Crystal and Matteo Scalera. Sean Crystal's art is cartoony. He does superhero art, but he does cartoony really, really well. I'm in this weird place where I'm not a realistic artist like an Alex Ross, or like Lee Weeks is somebody who is very, you can see the like advertising style realism in his work, but it's still super heroic, and it still, captures all of that, all the energy of superhero comics while still being able to sell a certain level of realism. Um, I'm in this weird space where I'm not quite realistic. I'm not as cartoony as, say, someone like a Sean Crystal or a Jim Mahfood. If I had to describe my work, I would say it's illustrative, but I don't know, maybe it's a good thing that it's hard for me to define my work, because maybe it means that my work just doesn't look like a lot of other people's work. But I do find it somewhat frustrating to a certain degree that I can't put a name on it. Like, I still feel like, to completely reverse what I was saying earlier about my work looks like my work, so I don't really, I guess that's what having a style means. But at the same time, I do feel like my style is ill-defined. I mean, I can give you my whole list of influences, but giving you my list of influences, I don't know if my work really adds up to all of those influences. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz, John Byrne, Walt Simonson, Frank Miller, Howard Chaykin. Honestly, if I were going to say that I feel like my work is close to anyone, it would be Howard Chaykin's. And what is interesting is I was never somebody who closely followed Gil Kane's work. I've looked at him, now, but I'd never really read any Gil Kane growing up, and I didn't consider him one of my influences. However, Howard Chaykin, I do consider a huge influence on me, both in terms of storytelling, and I think in sort of the angular way that I draw. I think I get a lot of that from looking at Chaykin's work. But it wasn't until listening to interviews later in life, I've mentioned this on the stream before, and I found out that that Chaykin was an assistant to Gil Kane, and even though I didn't consider Kane an influence on me, he was a huge influence on someone who's one of my major influences. And that's one of those things where, like, there's a certain level of comic book heritage, or things that get passed down from one artist to another. And, it used to be when artists were people's assistants and everyone was like living in New York City, and you'd become an assistant to somebody, you'd learn from them, and then you'd carry on all, usually with a lot of habits you picked up from the people that you were learning from. But now in this world where we all just read books and emulate artists, and there aren't necessarily as much in-person interaction, I'll say definitely there's to a degree to which that virtual legacy, that idea of things that influenced, I'm influenced by the influences of my influences. For instance, being a fan of Bill Sienkiewicz, when I was in high school, that's what led me to start investigating Gustav Klimt. Because, I think I had heard him mention Klimt in an interview once. It seems silly to me that I'm doing all this drawing on this hand over here, and the camera is so far away from where that hand is. Let's see here. Paul says that head is spot on. So the new hand is nice too. Thank you. And yes, the metatarsals. Or that's actually metacarpals. Well, there's the carpal tunnel. There's the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. And then the phalanges, I think, are just the little tips of the fingers. But yeah, I do need to break out the anatomy book and do a whole session where we do a deep dive into that. Herman says, oh, brother, yes, sketching hands and feet feels really hard. I will be working on sketching vehicles soon, like some Sean Murphy style. Wish I could pick up on stuff like drawing horses and cars. Well, I mean, honestly, a lot of it is just trying to draw the thing, drawing it badly, and then instead of getting pissed off and giving up, looking at the bad drawings and saying, all right, well, what is it that I'm trying to do here? And literally, me doing this drawing here of a set of bones is me trying to look at a bad drawing and say, all right, how can I do this better? Let's see here. I think that I'm getting close to the end of this session. Maybe I'll draw one more thing. Let me go through a couple more comments here. See if there's anything else I want to draw before we wrap up. Paul says, I feel like that hand should wrap around the neck. Well, that would be model could have taken that pose. That would be interesting. Herman says, I'm just going to trace stuff to understand it more often. Well, I will recommend that in addition to tracing stuff, the idea is once you draw the thing, whatever it is that you're drawing, is to then say, all right, like for instance, this hand did not come out very well. And that led me to want to get into the structure with the bones. But trying to take, like if you were to trace a picture of a car, let's pretend this hand was a car. The next step would then be looking at it and saying, well, what is the overall bounding box of the car? And then saying, all right, well, what is the shape of, I know this is just the wrist, but I'm pretending like, let's say I'm looking at the different parts that are sticking out of a car, what is the main shape of the cabin? What's the bounding box for the wheels, or what's the slant of the hood, and creating a bounding box for like the shapes within the shape. And I feel like understanding the volumes that are making up what's happening inside of a major form, those are the things that will help you go from, because I'm not saying don't trace. I'm saying do the tracing and then break down what you trace, dig deeper, go underneath. That's the next step. Let's see here. James says, I tried my hardest in school. Ervin says to Paul, hands around the neck like a wrestling move. Yeah, Paul said like posing it's on a staff. Yeah, that was what was originally happening with the original drawings. Yeah, the hand was just resting on a staff there. And HJM says, hey, Jeremy, haven't been in the stream in a while. Been busy with my creative media coursework, but I got a distinction, so it was worth it. Art looks fantastic. Well, congratulations on getting that distinction, and thank you for the kind words. James says, at times I felt overwhelmed knowing that I would be critiqued and had expectations. Sure, you could do something that no one can point out a mistake, but are you doing that just to do it? Let me see here. Well, I guess let me take that. Well, because when you say that, sure, you could do something that no one can point, so that no one can point out a mistake. Well, first off, the first thing is I think that that's questionable. I don't know if you could do something that somebody couldn't point a mistake out in. I feel like no matter how good an artist is, like I talk to enough other artists that people who work professionally doing art full time, they'll look at their work and they'll point, well, I messed up on this. The values are off here. I wanted to do this better. They can point out like any given artist can point out 5 different things in their piece that they would change if they had a chance to do it over again. So the idea of doing something just so that people can't point out mistakes, I I don't know if someone can really make a piece that is flawless. And let's say that, and here's the thing, let's say that you eliminate all technical mistakes. Let's say all technical mistakes are eliminated from a piece. Then you get to the idea of, well, does it capture any emotion or energy? Does it have anything in it that, let's see here. I'm trying to look and find some other drawing to do a quick sketch of while we're talking. There's this guy here. Well, this one takes up the full page. It's a tall figure, 20-minute pose. Let's see. I'll go ahead and just draw along the side here. I mean, I don't think that this is a particularly bad drawing. You know what? It kind of goes against the point of me doing these, which is to really fix well, what's going on up here. Yes, it's obvious he's wrapping his hands around his shoulder, but I don't feel like I really necessarily pulled it off well. So maybe that's something that needs to be fixed. The idea of doing something, I don't fear critique. And I can understand the idea of being paralyzed by something, but paralyzed into not wanting to do work because you fear criticism. I am a very, very harsh critic. And to be honest, I criticize my work. Like, the idea of someone saying something is wrong in my piece doesn't bother me, because anything anyone says about how bad a drawing I did is, I've already said that much and worse about my own art. And I don't say it in an insulting way. It's the fact that I think about how much I need to learn, the things that I want to accomplish in a drawing. And I'm in a weird place where I have enough knowledge that I can perceive my shortcomings, but not enough skill to eliminate them. It's like that thing, that hourglass thing about how your taste improves faster than your skills. So yeah, I guess I never really was worried about being critiqued, because I just feel like here's the thing, if somebody points out that something is bad in my drawing, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad human being. It means that the drawing is bad. And I think an important part is being able to separate, to make a distinction between criticism of the work and criticism of the human being. I don't really mind if someone has negative things to say about my work, but, well, I think that that's a different way of categorizing it, because a critique is not necessarily a negative thing. Because for the most part, when people give me critiques, people will tell, I have friends who will tell me, hey, the proportion's a little wonky there. This figure doesn't, is out of proportion. The volumes aren't working. That muscle that you drew doesn't exist. And I have friends who will tell me that. And they're not telling me that because they are there to make me feel bad. They're telling me that because they're trying to help me. They want me to be the best artist I can be. So the idea of someone giving me a critique, like, for instance, somebody made a comment. I did a video one time where I was redrawing, I was doing a master study from John Buscema. And a person came in and said, hey, this is just nowhere near John Buscema. Whatever you're trying to do, it's not there yet. And I told him, I 110% agree with you. That's the whole point of me doing this study. Yeah, I am not even 1/10 of the artist John Buscema is, but I feel like studying from him and looking at his work and trying to hold it up as a signpost or a flag for what I should be trying to aspire to is a useful exercise. I think that he might have taken it as me saying, oh, I am the next John Buscema, which is not what I was trying to do. But I certainly don't take offense at the idea of someone pointing out something that is true, which is John Buscema is significantly, his work is significantly better than what I'm capable of. His entire, like on his worst day, it's still better than anything that I do. I don't take offense at that. Now that might be a personality thing, because I do understand the idea of feeling very vulnerable and exposed when you share your work with people. If someone's going to have something to say to critique it, I get that. But I also feel like, to a certain degree, one of the most important things artists can develop, it's not about developing a thick skin. It is the knowledge that the act of creativity is the act of ongoing iterative failure. You're going to keep trying to do stuff and you're going to keep missing the mark. And if you put it out there in the public, people are going to see you missing the mark. And I feel like making peace with that is a big part of the creative process. So, yeah, I can, while I understand the idea of having your work held up for critique being something that would impede you wanting to put work out there in the world, I get that. And I don't, it's not like I said that's not a real thing and you should get over it. I think it's a completely real and natural thing. But at a certain point, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of like, I guess, maybe like doing jujitsu or doing any martial art where you learn to take a punch. And after a while, you realize that the punches are just part of the process. It's not necessarily that you have to hurt when you make something and somebody points out something's wrong with it. There's always going to be something wrong with it. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it's okay that there's always going to be something to critique. It's okay that there's always going to be something wrong. It's okay that you're always going to miss the mark, because it is very, very rare for someone to be so good that they hit the mark every single time. And, making peace with that, I think, is part of the process where it frees you up. It frees you up to try. That's what I'm really trying to get at, is that accepting critique and accepting the fact that you're going to fail frees you up to try. Because if you let fear of failure stop you from trying, then you've already lost. So, let people critique how they're going to critique, and, keep trying to make stuff. All right. I started late, but I should probably wrap up here soon. Let me take a look. Let's run through the last couple of comments, and and then we'll call it a day. Let's see here. Herman says, oh, wow, loved Joe Madiera. Awesome artist in the late 90s and 2000s. He says, I think he went into making video games a bit. I can describe my work, sometimes cartoony, then I go really detailed. Yeah, I have the Art of Darksiders. That was I think the first video game that Joe Mad's company made. And that book is amazing. It's got tons of awesome Joe Mad art in it. Sorry, slurping the last of my coffee. But yeah, love me some Joe Mad. Honestly, I love the stuff that he did after he kind of broke in and started going, even his late Battle Chaser stuff, and then kind of honestly, I like the stuff that he's done in the video game space even more than his comic book work. He's an amazing artist, but I don't know, for some reason I love his concept work in the sketchier, looser stuff even more. See here. Paul says you have a burlesque style. And yes, I agree, Paul. He says that Joe Mad was real stylistic. James says meaning making corrections prior to being critiqued. Well, I mean, in a way, well, I would assume that if you're making a piece and you see that something's wrong with it, you would try to make corrections prior to a critique. Yeah, I mean, I don't see. Not only do I not see anything wrong with that, I feel like what I'm doing now is the whole point of this is sort of a feedback loop. So when I get in front of the figure and I do drawings from models, I make mistakes. So I come back later and I try to look at the mistakes I made and I try to figure out what it was I did wrong, what I should have done. And so this is me trying to make but the idea is that I use that knowledge from the analysis that I'm doing now to try and prevent mistakes in the future. And sometimes I'll be sitting in front of the model and let's say the model's doing a 20-minute pose and they finish the pose. Many times after the model finishes the pose, I will, if I see things and I'm like, oh, this is off, that's off, I'll keep drawing. So the model's not in front of me anymore, but I'll be trying to understand, to correct, to change. I guess, James, I'm wondering, do you feel like it's a bad thing to make a change simply because you make a mistake? Or I mean, because it sounds to me like there's some concern about the idea of you make a piece, but because you know it's wrong or because you know it's going to be critiqued, that you make changes to it. And the way I look at it is if I make a drawing, whether it's going to be critiqued or not, if I see something wrong with it or a way to improve it, then I'll just improve it. And I think that that's different from making changes simply to get a good grade is different from making changes because you see something that can be better. So it comes down to your personal taste in the fact that if you feel like the drawing is fine, but you know that like changing it will say, oh, this will make the person who's critiquing me not say anything, or I know that I'm going to get dinged on this. Well, then it really comes down to how much you value the opinions of the people critiquing it. Because if the people that are critiquing it genuinely are making critiques because they're like, this is what makes a good drawing, and you want to make a good drawing and you value their opinion, then in a way, you're just anticipating the critique and you're saying, all right, does this genuinely make my art better? And that's really the question you have to ask yourself is the critique making the art better, technically, creatively, gesturally, whatever way it improves? And if it does, then yeah, I would change that before someone's going to critique it. I mean, I feel like critique gets a bad rap because as long as someone isn't being a dick, as long as they're presenting it in a helpful way, like, hey, you should do this better, or here's a way to do this better, then I'm willing to try it. And a lot of times I will try it and it doesn't work for me, but it's because I haven't found a way to really digest those critiques in a way that I can now execute and it fits my style. So let's see here. Herman's saying about Joe Mad, I still love his work. I think now I'm on this Sean Murphy kick because he does a lot of inking, but also painterly when using ink like washes. Yeah, I love me. Yeah, Sean Murphy's one of my favorites too. I have a wide variety of styles that I'm into. That's probably my biggest challenge, and that's the reason why I love Bill Sienkiewicz, is because he plays so well with a wide variety of artists, of technique and medium and approaches. Let's see here. And Jim says, those phalanges are banging. Thank you, Jim. Let's see here. Decker 2049. Hey, says, were you a fan of the recent? And good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in a while. Were you a fan of the recently passed Butch Geis? Yes, Butch Geis, Jackson Geis, amazing artist that we lost recently. I'm trying to think. I think the first time I saw his work was in the early parts of X Factor. I feel like when X Factor was launched with Louise Simonson, that I think he drew the first arc of X Factor, and yeah, I definitely loved his work. I'm trying to think of what else of his work that I've read. I want to say that he also was on, like, these are now me going way back, because he has a very, very long career. He's done a lot of stuff. I haven't read as much of his DC work. Most of the stuff I read was his Marvel stuff. And I want to say when they relaunched Marvel relaunched Ghost Rider in the 90s, the Danny Ketch iteration. I want to say that before Mark Texiera came on board, that Butch Geis was on that book as well. But yeah, amazing artist, and it sucks that he is gone. And it is yet another reminder that I'm getting old, because my heroes are passing away. Let's see here. Herman says, that's the part, G. I don't like looking at me draw trash work. He says, I have a lot to work on that. I've told this story before, but I was in a figure drawing class years ago, and the model took a pose where the knee was pointing at me in a very short, foreshortened angle, coming at me visually. And I drew it, and it sucked. And I was like, all right, well, and I just went on, drawing the rest of the class. But then later in the evening, the model took not the exact same pose, but her knee was in the same pose. And I was drawing it. And again, I really did a crappy job. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. I said, oh, I do not understand how to draw the knee from this angle. And if I don't learn how to do it, I will always continue to make that same mistake. And that is how I got into the habit of redrawing my drawings and using my bad drawings as a tool to learn, to correct all of these mistakes. So instead of looking at a drawing that came out poorly, like right here, the calf going backward, that's fine. Once you get to the other side behind there, this is just a weird ball with a fin sticking off of it. That's not an actual foot. That needs to be fixed. But the idea of looking at mistakes that you make and feeling disgusted with yourself, or feeling downtrodden or beat down, or just not wanting to look at your stuff, I look at it all as it's just tools to help me get to where I'm going. And if you can look at your mistakes and stop feeling like okay, this is the way to look at it. Your mistakes are not flaws, they're clues. Everyone says, how do I become a better artist? How do I become a better artist? How do I learn? How do I grow? How do I do this? How do I do that? Look at the things that you do wrong, because they are the answers. The answer to how to do that is for me to say, all right, like for instance, this foot. Feet are hard to draw anyway. But first, I need to understand, what does a foot look like? I need to be able to do multiple things. Let me come over here. I need more space to draw now. I got to move over. Adjust this camera. Need a little bit more room. So in order to fix this foot, I need to first be able to break a foot down into primitive volumes. That's one. Then I need to, and by the way, this should actually be angled so that you get the big toe coming out. You've got the little toes. But one, you need to be able to break the foot into primitive volumes. Two, you need to be able to imagine what those volumes look like from different angles. And even this one is not great. And sometimes when I'm having trouble with it, I'll draw grids across it like you're drawing in like you're making a 3D model in Blender. But one, you have to be able to imagine 3D volumes. Two, you need to be able to turn those volumes and imagine them at different angles. And then three, you need to be able to put actual skin on top of them. So this whole thing needs to be clarified and broken down in that way. But my greater point is, you do a bad drawing, look at it, and the answers are in the bad drawing. Because if you don't figure out what's wrong with that drawing, then you're not going to move forward. So don't be afraid of looking at your bad work. The answers are in the bad work. Save your bad drawings, and study them. Analyze them. Put sheets of tracing paper on top of them and redraw them with like an anatomy book sitting next to you. And look at it and say, well, wait, is this really what I think it is? Or am I just imagining how this is put together? Let's see here. Paul had mentioned when we were talking about artists, he said, I don't know a lot of these artists. Always pick up some knowledge on the GB stream. That is kind of you to say. Yeah, I mean, that just comes from a lifetime of reading comics. I mean, honestly, I'm really bad at contemporary creators that are making comics. I'm not reading a lot of new stuff. And I think that, there's going to be artists in the next generation who are going to have an encyclopedic knowledge of artists in the 2020s. So let's see here. Paul mentions the metatarsals in the feet. Yes, the metatarsals. Yeah, they're metacarpals in the hands and metatarsals in the feet. Let's see here. Herman says, I can't do it. My coloring is trash, and transitioning from one paint stroke to another is trash because my coloring is trash. I'm aware of a lot of my art issues. Just take time to work on it. Well, yeah. First off, you went from drawing to color. I'm bad at color. I got no business telling anybody how to color. I have a whole personal journey I need to go on in terms of understanding color better. I focus mostly on black and white and focusing on value, dark and light and how it defines form. And then really keeping my color schemes pretty simple, just monochromatic, or like a color for warms and a color for cools, or one color plus a contrasting accent color. I try to keep it real simple, but my use and understanding of color is very rudimentary. If anything, that's mainly because I have so much work to continue doing on the figure and anatomy. But if I had the time, I would be doing the same level of study on color that I'm doing on anatomy and the figure. So it's all there. It's all an ongoing journey. And knowing and accepting that there's places where I'm flawed, that's fine. It's perfectly fine. It's part of the journey. Chris is in the chat. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Yeah, all right. I'm going to set my drawing board down here, and we're going to finish, unless something requires me sketching, we're going to finish up the comments on the stream, and we're going to call this a day, because otherwise we're going to be here all day. Um, so James says, okay, that makes sense. Would you say that learning from a piece and incorporating that into one is a sign of growth? Maybe you haven't learned how to do something, in which case you can try it again. Outside critiques is a way to learn. Plus, some were more valuable to me than others. Well, that's absolutely true. Some critiques are going to be more valuable than others because it really depends on how much the person who's critiquing can perceive. Because sometimes a person maybe can see that something's wrong and they'll give you a critique, but if they themselves aren't necessarily informed about that aspect of the drawing, whether it's anatomy, volume, tone, proportion, they might just say, well, it's wonky. And I'd say, well, you've got an anatomy problem. It's not really an anatomy problem. It's a volume problem. You're just not describing the volumes correctly, but you know what the anatomy is. Or it might be the exact opposite. You're putting volumes in there and it looks like a three-dimensional object, but you've got lumps and bumps and muscles that don't exist, and by the way, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because when you look at guys like Kirby, he definitely, sometimes people would say his anatomy was exaggerated, but he could sell it. And that's the other thing, is knowing the difference between a creative choice. That's where we get back to style versus craft. Because if you're making a specific choice to describe something in a visual way, even though you have the ability, you know what it is because sometimes you'll draw something the way I see this in figure drawing all the time, which is why I say if you want to get better, go sit in front of a live model every week and draw them. That's how you get better. The reason why is because I will sit in front of the model and I'll take it to the point where I'm like measuring with my pencil, and I'll be like, all right, I've got the height, I've got the width, it's in proportion, it's working. And it'll just lay there, dead, lifeless on the page. It's in proportion, and the person doesn't look lifeless. They're a human being in front of me. But when you look at it on the page, you reduce it down to a two-dimensional surface, it feels lifeless. And that's where you get the things, like I said, with Kirby and exaggerating things, is you might say, well, in order to make this feel three-dimensional, to make this person feel like they're moving, like there is action, even if it's a resting pose, you might want to have a resting pose where it feels like the person is kind of breathing. You may enhance things. Kind of like in animation, they call it plussing. So you plus the drawing. You just add a little bit to it. And the reason why I avoid the word exaggeration is because exaggeration, automatically people feel like it's the Tex Avery pushing things to making them rubbery. You don't want to make things rubbery. You just want things to feel more lifelike, more energetic. And that's not necessarily to say, and again, going back to people like J. Scott Campbell or Joe Mad, exaggeration can work really well. But that is a skill unto itself, to make things cartoony and exaggerated, but have them always feel good. That takes time. And I think that it's also one of those things where some people can slip in and out of it by choice. For some people, you have to learn how to be cartoony. Some people have to learn how to dial back exaggeration. We all have strengths and weaknesses. So it's possible to slip in and out of these things very easily, or it's possible that you have to work to do one or the other. You know what? I missed the entire thing. The main question that James had, learning from a piece and incorporating that into another piece is a sign of growth. I would say absolutely. That is the exact nature of growth, is to iterate on your craft, is to do a piece. And I mean, I'll sit here and I will redraw the same drawing multiple times, trying to figure out what's not working. A much more useful skill that I still am trying to achieve, I haven't mastered this. Much more useful skill is to look at one drawing, see what's wrong with it, and then when you're doing a different drawing or a different pose, to be able to apply the lessons from one drawing to the next pose. I can do it to some degree, but when you're looking at a very specific anatomical problem, it may just be that anatomical problem doesn't repeat itself in the next drawing. What is more common for me is I will be drawing from the model. And like I said before, that example of getting all the measurements down and it feeling lifeless. And instead of redrawing that pose right there, I will say, oh, my drawings are real stiff this session. I need to add more energy in the next pose. And that's a case of me iterating just in one session. In fact, at the very top of my drawing board, not my drawing board, but at the top of my easel is a Post-it that I used to have on my drawing board. There's a little Post-it here that says feel. That's there because it's to remind me when I'm drawing to not just draw stiff ass figures, to try and make things feel alive. Because a lot of times, if I can get a good energetic gesture in a drawing, the drawing doesn't necessarily have to even be that good. If your drawing has energy to it, energy will buy you a lot of forgiveness, a lot of grace from viewers. There can be a lot more anatomical flaws in a drawing, but if it has energy and feeling to it, people will say, oh, I like that drawing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good drawing for someone to like it. And that is the ongoing struggle. Like, this goes back to the thing that, James, you were saying about the idea of making corrections just because you know someone's going to critique it. In the same way that putting energy into a drawing just because you know it's going to get a positive response versus a drawing that maybe might be accurate but be kind of blah, not exciting, not energetic. It's just the right answer. And in a perfect world, I think what we strive for is a drawing that has all parts of the engine firing, has the engine firing on all cylinders, to have the energy, to have the anatomy, to have the structure, to feel three-dimensional, to have line weights that work, to have shadows that are in the right place, and have a nice tonal arrangement of shadows and lights and values so that, it helps enhance the three-dimensional feel to the drawing, to have all of these things going at once. It's a lot. That's why I go every week, and why I've been going every week for years and years and years, and why I keep taking these classes, is because there's so much to getting these drawings right that has to happen in order to have it be a good drawing. And when you look at the artists who can do a good drawing and bang them out over and over and over again, a small degree of them are just blessed with some supernatural talent. Most of them have just worked their ass off for decades. That's just it. There are people who talent is a real thing. Most of the time, it's hard work. And I think it was even Michelangelo who said that if people saw how hard I worked on my drawing, they'd be far less impressed with the results. I can't remember if he said if it was his drawings or his sculptures, but his point was that it's a lot more of it is hard work versus just, talent or, a gift from the gods or what have you. Dylan said that you mentioned that a bad critique about your work doesn't mean you're a bad person. I have to work on that. Yeah. You can't assign your self-worth to the results. Assign your self-worth to the effort. Did you work as hard as you could? Did you try? Trying and failing, I think, is much more valuable than making something great effortlessly. Because for most of the people who make great art, the effort, they've already put in the effort. The effort is all of the trying and failing they've done before. So when someone comes in and just says that they don't like something you did, I mean, it can be the best piece you've ever made in your life. There will probably still be flaws in it. And guess what? That's okay, because we are flawed creatures. We as human beings, no one is perfect. No one is above critique, but hopefully when we receive critique, it's delivered with the intent of support and kindness. And I think that's the bigger difference, is in a world where people love to seem to love tearing each other down and dumping on people and crapping on people and starting flame wars and all that crap. The idea of giving someone not a critique, but trying to give somebody help. The idea of simply saying, hey, I see what you're doing here. I see you struggling. Maybe try this. Maybe this will help you. That's the way, in my mind, that critique should be delivered, is that critique should be delivered with love, And yeah, I know it's the whole like whiplash, Art School Confidential, of like people having like the brutal critiques where they're tearing each other down. But I think for the most part, we're all scared, vulnerable, creative types that are putting our hearts out there for people to step on, and it's terrifying. I won't say that my heart is hardened so that when people step on it, it doesn't hurt. That's not what's happening here. It's simply, you know what? I mean, it kind of sucks because it goes in the face of what I said about it's no, it doesn't. This sounds like I'm saying two different things, but I'm going to step on my heart harder than anybody else is going to, in terms of me critiquing myself harshly. That's why negative critiques don't bother me, is because I'm thinking things 10 times harsher. But the statement that the harshness of the critique does not determine my quality, my worth as a human being, is also true. So that goes back to what you were saying, Dylan, in terms of needing to work on that. That's the thing. That's what it is I don't beat up on myself. I beat up on the work. I beat up on the drawing. I don't beat up on me. I'm just another human being trying to do the best, trying to get better. But the work is the work. All right. Last couple of comments here. Let me get through this and we'll wrap it up here. James says, I never really took critiques as insult. I didn't always agree with them or thought they were tactful, but I agree with them missing the mark. Paul says, perfection kills progress. Herman says, dude, you did a good job with on that shading the leg muscle. Well, thank you. A lot of times shading is really about just trying not to get overly complex. If I were doing this as a really detailed anatomical study, then I would be coming in and doing more subtle shades to kind of defy the quadriceps, the different muscles and the places where, the rectus femoris is going up into the pelvis, all of these different anatomical things that are in there. But for something like this, it's really just a matter of trying to keep the overall shape and keeping that simple. But thank you. Let's see here. Dylan says there was a post a few years ago of a mangaka artist showing his artwork throughout the day, and he was great and also terrible. Let's see here. James says, I don't know if you saw my question about passion and skill. I might have missed it. Let me go back up and look at the other comments, but I saw the one about incorporating learning from a piece and incorporating it. Yeah, I don't think I saw the question about passion and skill. But let me come down here. If you want to throw it in there again, let me know. But let me come through and continue with these the questions here. And Dylan asks, what flavor of coffee? It's Pete's Coffee. It's like a Keurig pod. Major Dickinson's coffee roast with coffee mate that's like vanilla caramel creamer. So yeah, just homemade coffee. It's in a Starbucks cup. This because I reused this reusable Starbucks coffee cups. Let's see here. James says, when I was doing figure drawing in San Jose, my drawings looked a little goofy as I was getting a sense of what I was doing. I tried to make it better, though. So maybe not a bad thing, but at times I would think, oh, if I make a correction here or check off a box, no one will say anything. Yeah, well, I guess it's really, again, having a sense, and this is one of the things I think that's really hard about art school, is that a lot of times people are going into art school in their early 20s. And I think that the challenge is being in school at a time when you're young enough that you're still malleable, but old enough that you have a strong sense of what it is you want out of it. Because, the idea of making a correction, well, that's the real question is making the correction truly checking off a box, or are you actually learning something from that correction? So that the real question then comes down to the changes that you're making and why you're making them. Do you understand why you're making them? Do you agree with why you're making them? And that goes back to how you may not necessarily agree with a critique. But if you look at something and they're saying, hey, there's a place where the bone hits the surface of the figure here, and you're not showing that, that isn't necessarily a checking off a box. That's, oh, I'm trying to get the anatomy correct. And this drawing, adding this tone or this corner or this hard line here will show this thing that I was missing. That's a place where a critique is very concretely saying, oh, there was something missing from this drawing. Now, if someone's going to critique you on missing that thing, but if you put that thing in and then it actually distracts from the drawing, and maybe that line is in a place where it breaks the sense that the body is twisting in the way it's actually twisting, then that's a place where someone may call you on it, but you know that you left it out for a particular reason. I always say, try it and see if it makes the drawing better, because people make suggestions all the time. And, the idea of checking off a box, it's worth exploring. If someone's making a critique, it's just worth, for me, making the attempt to do the thing is part of the asking of, is this a critique that someone is saying just because they're saying it? Or does this actually make the drawing better? Is this actually, am I missing something by not doing this? That's the question that is worth asking of any given critique. So just the idea of, is it bad to make a change or not? That's an open-ended question. It depends on circumstance. You can't just say blanket yes or no. Herman says, right, I was about to say, critiques do matter when it's good. I've seen people give critiques and barely even lift a pencil. When does it matter whom critiques you, even when they destroy you? Let's see here. I don't know if you're asking me, I guess, when does it matter whom critiques you? Well, again, these are things that are up to the individual person to decide. What it comes down to for me is, does the critique teach you anything? If it teaches you something, it doesn't matter who it comes from. I've had people who I know in terms of actual physical drawing skill know a lot less about drawing than I do, give me critiques and comments. And if the comment is an accurate comment about something that I left out that I shouldn't have, or put in that's making the drawing worse, then it's a valid critique. So I don't necessarily it comes down to, I don't base my assessment of a critique on how much the person knows. I base it on how much it applies to the thing I'm doing at that moment. So we're getting into a lot of, in the conversation of critiques, we're getting into a lot of the area of circumstantial, or conditional. Situational is the word I'm looking for. We're getting into situational context. And in fact, let's put it this way. I try to assume that any critique I'm getting, bar none, let's just start with let's assume that they're providing me information that's useful feedback. Maybe they're not providing it in a kind way. Maybe they're not providing it. Maybe there's somebody who isn't necessarily as experienced in the topic in the area that they're critiquing as I am. But still, they're providing me information. And the question is that information valid? And the other thing to look at is if someone is critiquing my work, maybe the thing they're critiquing is wrong, but my drawing isn't accurately communicating what I'm trying to communicate. So that's a whole nother thing. Like in screenwriting, they talk about the note behind the note. The idea that a producer may look at a draft of a script the screenwriter made for a film. They said, in this scene, this character needs to be more likable. And, and they start making suggestions about the dialogue or having them save a puppy or all this crap that the screenwriter's like, no, I don't want to do any of that. And that makes the scene worse. The screenwriter may realize that it's not that the character needs to be more likable. It is that the viewer and the reader of the screenplay need to understand the character's motivations better. And they may then instead rewrite the scene from that standpoint. And the way that applies to drawing is that in a drawing, in the same way, a person may critique something about it that's an anatomical detail or a compositional detail or a lighting or a color detail. And the thing that they are critiquing may not be the problem, but the fact that they have a problem with a piece means that you haven't communicated what you were trying to communicate, such that they won't have that issue because they will look at it as a whole and say, oh, I understand this piece. I understand why it is the way it is. It eliminates that question. And that's a much more difficult way to interpret critiques. It requires more work on you internally in terms of really understanding your goals and how you want to get there and what you want to communicate. There's layers to that. That's a harder thing to do. But that's part of the nature of making things. And to be honest, the more you make things, the more you interact with critiques, the better you get at picking out the useful bits. And as a side note, a lot of times that's the reason why it's good to get multiple opinions. Same way, like when you go to a doctor, you get a second opinion. If you have like 5 different people pointing out something that's wrong with your piece, that's wrong. If you have one person that says, this is wrong, if another person says, well, that's wrong, if another person says, well, this is great, but you could change that, then maybe the one thing that one person said isn't necessarily the problem. In fact, that's a great litmus test. Next time that somebody gives you a critique and you're trying to figure out how much value it has to it, show it to other people. Don't give them the background and just see if they pick up the same things. If you get 3 or 4 people calling out the same thing, that's how you know it's a problem. If you get different people pointing out different things, then what it is that you're not communicating your overall vision clearly. And that is a much more complicated question to answer because you need to figure out, what is it that I do want to communicate? And what do I need to do in order to get that across? That's a lot more complicated. So dealing with complicated critiques, and then becomes like a 4-dimensional chess game. But hey, guess what? The beauty is you got your entire life to play that game, so you keep playing it. Jim says, you never draw the Nickelodeons? I don't even know what that is, Jim. Is another character from one of your shows? Because it reminds me of midichlorians from Star Wars. See here. Herman's got a bounce. He says, a good one. Thanks for the stream. Well, thank you for hanging out. James says, I remember using colored pencils when coloring my drawings. That would make a cool look for a comic. You know what's interesting? I think Emil Ferris, who did it's my something is my name is monsters, or I forget what it is, but she did like an Eisner Award-winning comic. And I think she colored it all with midichlorians. It is what Jim was saying. You never draw midichlorians. Well, they're very difficult to get down anatomically. Their structure seems to keep changing, Jim. But yeah, James, what is her name? You know what? I'm going to look it up on the side on my phone just so that I can tell you exactly. I think it's My Name is Monsters, but oh, My Favorite Thing is Monsters. That's what it's called. Her name is Emile Ferris. The book is called My Favorite Thing is Monsters. But yeah, so I think used, I haven't read that yet, but it's on my list to read. But from what I've seen of the interior artwork, she uses a lot of colored pencil in her comic book work. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. I think that's it would definitely stand out because not a lot of people necessarily use that look. So James, yeah, I say go for it. Herman says, I pressed the like button, but I'm out. All right, man. Cool. Have a good one. Be well. James says that's a good point about energy, and also asks, is it a bad thing if you're passionate but lack skill? I felt that I did at times. Can passion be more admirable than skill? Well, I think that passion is what keeps you going while you lack skill. I think that if you can use that passion as a motivative tool to do better work, then it is absolutely not. I mean, here's the thing. I don't think that I aspire to have skill because I enjoy learning how to draw better. I enjoy draftsmanship and the pursuit of it. That said, I mean, there's lots of cartoonists for whom, okay, I never liked the idea of throwing shade at other artists, but let's look at like the newspaper comic strip Kathy. I don't know Kathy Guyswhite. I was never really into that comic strip, but the point is my point is her artwork is not like Andrew Loomis draftsmanship, you know? I mean, hell, let's go to Charlie Brown. Let's go to Charles Schultz. You know, he doesn't draw like Andrew Loomis. Having a thing that you want to express, sometimes having a lot of skill in terms of like draftsmanship or technical proficiency can be a boost. Sometimes it can be a detraction or a distraction. I think that what's more important is that you have something that you want to put out in the world and you have a vision for how you want to tell it. And if that vision requires skill, like for instance, if you want to do like a superhero comic, there's a certain level of draftsmanship that is expected with superhero comics. Even though manga often is cartoonier, there's a certain level of draftsmanship that's expected to do manga. Now, when it comes to, say, newspaper strips, that level of that expectation for draftsmanship is not necessarily there. It's not as important. You look at a lot of web comics. Look at something like XKCD. There's lots of comics where draftsmanship is not particularly important. There's also web comics where draftsmanship is really, 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 really important, and people make beautiful art with it. I think that this whole angle of questioning of is something a good thing or a bad thing, at a certain point, I stop really giving shit about whether something is good or bad. And at the end, I decide, well, what is it that I want? And I think that is what that's the way I would filter any question you have about judging or evaluating art, James, specifically. whether passion versus having passion without skill is good or bad. Um, all of the questions about craft or critique, whether it's good or bad. What matters is, do you have a clear sense of what you want in any creative endeavor? And then does the thing that you're asking, whether it's passion versus skill, whether it's critiques, does the thing that you're evaluating help you get closer to the thing that you want? And that's the only thing that matters. Because, if I'm sitting and giving someone advice and they're trying to do like a syndicated cartoon style comic strip, my advice may not be particularly helpful to them. Because mostly I come from a background of superhero comics, sci-fi, and European. I'm very influenced by European comics as well. Like I had a subscription to heavy metal at like 13. So like from 13 to like 15 or 16, I was like, I've got like a bunch of heavy metal at that very formative age where stuff is just shaping and warping your reality, and I'm seeing so many different styles. And also I like newspaper strips. For instance, Berkeley Breathed, who does Bloom County and Outland. It doesn't look like, honestly, I think when we think about draftsmanship in newspaper strips, I think of Bill Watterson. I mean, most people would say, Bill Watterson is one of the most amazing artists ever, but he does cartoony stuff. When he does like watercolors, like on those Sunday strips, you do these beautiful art pieces. He's somebody who is a master draftsman, and he's just doing cartoony work with his master draftsmanship. But when you look at somebody like Berkeley Breathed, who I think is a great artist and a great visual storyteller, the success of his work doesn't depend on his draftsmanship. So, the idea of lacking skill, if skill was the thing that was the gatekeeper for getting into, say doing newspaper strips, we wouldn't have Bloom County. We wouldn't have Kathy doing newspaper strips. We wouldn't have Charles Schultz. We'd have Walt Kelly, and we'd have Walt Kelly and Bill Watterson, and we'd have like Milton Caniff, which again, I'd love to have a newspaper full of just that. But I think that the world is more interesting for having work in it where skill isn't the most important thing. And that's also a personal choice. There are people in the world who feel like skill is the most important thing, and that doesn't matter how funny it is. If it's not well drawn, it shouldn't exist. There are people for whom they only want comics that have both the humor and the high level Bill Watterson, Walt Kelly Milton Caniff draftsmanship. I don't agree with that, but I also don't feel like it's my place to impose my values on other people. I try to be very open-minded about art and feel like art is enough of a broad playground that there's room for all different types. And just because something doesn't appeal to me, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist. So I don't know if that answers your question. But to answer directly, no, I don't think it's a bad thing if you're passionate but lack skill. I think that if you're passionate but lack skill, then there's two roads that are open, and you can kind of travel both at the same time. You can say, all right, I'm passionate but I lack skill. I'm going to make artwork and work on improving my skills. You can also say, I'm passionate but I lack skill, so I'm going to use what abilities I do have to make artwork that is interesting, even if it's not skill-based. And I think you can travel the path of making artwork that is not skills-based, but just fueled by passion, and try to make it as interesting and engaging as possible and find ways to make it appealing, even if it's not necessarily well-drawn. And you can be doing that while at the same time trying to improve your skills. They don't have to be a one or the other. I am very much, the one thing I will say that I do resist, that I rail against, is binary options. I really don't like it's A or it's B. There's two paths and you have to pick one. I am very much a fan of trying to walk all paths at once, trying to take in a lot of different approaches, to leave room for doing multiple things at once. Yeah, I don't like putting things in a box and it's just this or it's just that. Because I don't think that that's the reality of human experience. I don't think that's the reality of the lives we live. Our lives very much are rarely just one thing or the other. Our lives are a complex mosaic of experiences and possibilities and desires and motivations and goals. Life is just a lot more complex than A and B. All right. That was a hell of a rant. So Dylan says, you think if we say passion enough, Corey will show up. You know what? He just might. He just might. Just by saying his name, this maybe will show up in his feed and call him there. And I hope that in me saying specifically, James, the idea that I'm not a fan of one or the other, the A and the B, that in a way, that's a critique. It's a critique of a worldview and an approach. And I hope that you take that idea in the way that same way we were talking about figure drawing ideas, that it's something that's helpful to you that you can use as a tool, because it's completely reasonable for someone to completely disagree with my way of thinking. But does my way of thinking spark something in you that you can use in your own work and your own approach? That's the more important thing. What I think really shouldn't matter at all to you, except for what you can take from it that's useful to move you forward towards your own goals. That's the more important thing. Dylan, you're ridiculous. All right, guys. What was I going to do? Oh, yeah, I was going to switch the camera back to me. And I was going to tell you guys that if you enjoy these live streams and would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get if you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress, animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at substack.com/@Jeremy. And if you'd like to listen to me knock stuff over in my studio and read physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up books like my most recent project, Morningstar. It's a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8, the conclusion to the series. And if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/Jeremy. You scroll down to book flip-throughs. There are flip-throughs so you can see what's inside the books. Check them out before you buy. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. That's it for now. Go be creative.